TIAN X Science is where science meets the unknown. And my name's TIAN. I'm from China.
Have you ever wondered if before the T-Rex appeared, there was actually an even more outrageous monster on Earth? About 99 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period on the continent of North Africa, one of the largest theropod predators in Earth history was roaming between rivers and swamps. It was the Spinosaurus. This monster could reach a maximum length of 14 meters or close to 46 feet, and its weight might have even reached 7.5 to 8 tons, coupled with its extremely bizarre body structure, especially that giant sail-like structure on its back. It gradually became one of the most famous dinosaurs globally. Even today, it remains a top favorite in the hearts of countless dinosaur enthusiasts. Another very important reason why Spinosaurus became so wildly popular is the movie Jurassic Park 3, where it faced off directly against a T-Rex and even outright killed it. Because of this classic battle, many people have long assumed that Spinosaurus and T-Rex were fated mortal enemies. The problem is that these two dinosaurs actually never met. Not only did their eras not match, but their habitats were completely different. T-Rex lived in North America, while Spinosaurus lived in North Africa. However, although T-Rex never had the chance to fight Spinosaurus, there really was another apex predator living in the same era as Spinosaurus that could compete with it for dominance. In some ways, it was even more dangerous. It possessed an extremely terrifying bite force and ridiculously sharp teeth. It was the Carcharodontosaurus. If you are a true dinosaur enthusiast or frequently consume this type of content, you have probably already heard this name. Over the past decade, the popularity of Carcharodontosaurus has surged gradually, making it one of the most closely watched large theropods. However, the time it was actually discovered by the paleontology community is much earlier than many people imagine. As early as 1914, an incomplete Carcharodontosaurus skeleton had already been found in Egypt. The discoverer was a German paleontologist. The problem was that the local situation was extremely chaotic at the time. A massive amount of political conflict made it impossible to transport this fossil for many years. It was not until 1922 that it was finally sent to Germany. Yet even after arriving in Germany, this skeleton sat in a warehouse for a full 9 years, gathering dust the entire time. Later, German paleontologist Ernst Stromer finally studied it formally. He quickly realized that this was not just a new species but an entirely new genus. Therefore, he named it Carcharodontosaurus. The meaning of this name is actually lizard with shark teeth, because this creature's teeth truly looked like a nightmare. They had an incredibly exaggerated similarity to the teeth of a great white shark, being massive, extremely sharp, and lined with serrations along the edges. Researchers found many very strange physical characteristics on the Carcharodontosaurus, making it completely unlike traditional theropod dinosaurs. But just before the research was to be officially published, disaster struck. During World War II, the museum housing this fossil was bombed. As a result, the entire Carcharodontosaurus skeleton was completely destroyed, disappearing along with a large number of other precious fossils. Fortunately, Carcharodontosaurus did not vanish forever like many destroyed fossils. After World War II, new Carcharodontosaurus fossils were discovered one after another. These new fossils finally allowed scientists to slowly understand why this monster could become one of the most successful hunters in a North African ecosystem teeming with apex predators. After all, that region contained not only Spinosaurus, but also numerous dangerous carnivores living alongside various gigantic herbivores. Being able to secure the spot of an apex predator in such an environment speaks volumes in itself. One of the core reasons why Carcharodontosaurus was so terrifying is, of course, its ridiculous size. After all, Spinosaurus alone is already one of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs in history. Yet, as if the land of North Africa was not crazy enough, it directly squeezed in another Carcharodontosaurus, another one of the largest terrestrial predators in history. However, not all Carcharodontosaurus were this absurdly huge. In 2007, scientists described a new species, with a body length of only about 10 meters, which is around 33 feet. Its maximum weight was about 4 tons, placing it roughly in the same weight class as the T-Rex. While this size is already very impressive, it is not quite enough to make the list of the largest giant theropods in Earth history. The truly outrageous one is actually the original species discovered first because its size was much larger. Back in 2007, scientists once estimated that an adult Carcharodontosaurus could reach a length of 13.3 meters, which is 44 feet. Its weight was even speculated to be as high as 15 tons. If this number were true, the weight of a single Carcharodontosaurus could equal the combined mass of 15 polar bears and would even surpass the T-Rex. Later, however, researchers found that this was clearly an overestimation. But even so, Carcharodontosaurus remains absurdly massive. Current mainstream estimates suggest its body length was close to 12.5 meters or about 41 feet. When standing, its shoulder height even approached that of an African savanna elephant. Moreover, scientists believe that occasionally monster-level individuals might appear. This means that some exceptionally large Carcharodontosaurus individuals could still exceed 13 meters in length, reaching over 43 feet. With such a massive size, its weight naturally would not be light. Although not as exaggerated as the previously speculated 15 tons, the largest, individuals could still approach 7 tons. From another perspective, this is already hundreds of times heavier than an average adult human. Most adult Carcharodontosaurus weighed around 5 tons, which is basically similar to an adult African elephant. Thanks to this size, Carcharodontosaurus is generally considered the 5th largest theropod dinosaur in Earth history. In other words, it is also the 5th largest terrestrial carnivore ever. This point alone is frightening enough, and honestly, this is something I truly would never want to encounter in real life. But the problem is that its size is actually not the most dangerous thing about Carcharodontosaurus. What is truly terrifying is its mouth. Every Carcharodontosaurus had at least 60 nightmare-inducing fangs inside its mouth. Some of these teeth were even longer than an adult human palm. These teeth were not only huge but also ridiculously sharp. The edge of every single tooth was densely covered with serrations, averaging about 20 tiny serrations per centimeter. In other words, every single tooth in a Carcharodontosaurus mouth was a giant steak knife in its own right. When all these terrifying features combined, its teeth looked almost identical to those of a great white shark, just magnified an unknown number of times. Because of this, a single bite from a Carcharodontosaurus could easily rip a massive chunk of flesh, muscle, and even internal organs right off a large prey animal. Those dense serrations acted like countless microscopic razor blades, concentrating force on every contact point, making the wound deeper, easier to tear, and much more lethal. And all of this was just because of its teeth. What is even more terrifying is that the Carcharodontosaurus skull itself was exaggeratedly massive. The most complete Carcharodontosaurus skulls discovered so far reaches a length of 1.6 meters, which is 5.2 feet. This is roughly as long as the entire body of a wolf. However, unlike the thick and heavy bone, crushing skull of a T-Rex, the skull of a Carcharodontosaurus was lighter and more elongated. It did not rely on the bite and crush attack method of a T-Rex. Instead, it behaved more like a true giant shark, using its sharp teeth to continuously slice and tear at its prey. It caused the prey to slowly collapse through massive blood loss, shock, and severe trauma. Honestly, this sounds even more terrifying than being directly crushed by a T-Rex. Of course, this does not mean the bite force of Carcharodontosaurus was weak. In fact, its maximum bite force still exceeded 11 tons. This amount of force is easily enough to tear through soft tissue and even crack bones directly. However, because its teeth were thinner, longer, and more prone to breaking, it most likely would not gnaw on the hardest bones like a T-Rex would. After all, it probably did not want to visit the dentist every day. Instead, Carcharodontosaurus preferred to tear off huge chunks of soft tissue directly from large prey. This hunting style made the entire process incredibly bloody. Paleontologists have even discovered that Carcharodontosaurus likely possessed one of the fastest tooth replacement rates among theropods. During an attack, its teeth would frequently get stuck in the prey flesh or even snap off. Therefore, rapid tooth replacement was in a way a mechanism to minimize battle damage. In addition to this, researchers have found that Carcharodontosaurus was highly likely an ambush predator. It possessed a certain degree of binocular vision, and the angle of its skull was very similar to that of a crocodile. This implies that it would probably hide itself first, use parallax to lock onto the distance of its prey, and accurately judge the timing of its attack. Then, relying on its strong and slender legs, it would suddenly accelerate and charge at its target. Do not forget that although its size was massive, its body structure was much more slender than many other large theropods, so its speed was actually not slow at all. In fact, for the fifth largest carnivorous dinosaur in history, it was ridiculously fast. Aside from its terrifying bite, Carcharodontosaurus actually had another weapon on its head, which was the bony protrusions on the bridge of its nose. Every Carcharodontosaurus had prominent ridges growing on both sides of its nasal bones. When alive, these areas might have been covered with keratin-forming structures similar to horns or battering rams. For a very long time, nobody knew what these things were actually used for. But in recent years, paleontologists have begun to suspect that Carcharodontosaurus might have head-butted each other, for example, when competing for territory, food, or mates. They might have even used these protrusions to ram their prey off balance, seizing the opportunity to deliver a fatal bite. Therefore, for the herbivores of that time, this was absolutely not good news. Besides heads, Carcharodontosaurus actually had another frequently underestimated feature, which is its arms. Many people have always assumed that the arms of all large theropods were short and useless, just like those of a T-Rex. However, Carcharodontosaurus was entirely different. Its forelimbs were much longer than those of a T-Rex, and they were very thick and heavily muscled. Scientists believe these arms were likely designed specifically to grapple with prey and prevent them from breaking free. There are even studies suggesting that an adult Carcharodontosaurus might have literally been able to lift a half-ton dinosaur right off the ground and shove it directly into its mouth. In other words, for those small to medium-sized dinosaurs, Carcharodontosaurus was practically the North African version of a nightmare. What is even more outrageous is that its hands themselves might have been weapons, because each finger grew a giant curved claw, and some of these claws were even longer than some of its teeth. So when you combine its arms, teeth, speed, vision, and that ridiculous size, altogether you will find that Carcharodontosaurus was simply a walking slaughter machine. And the most terrifying part is that even they themselves seemed to be very afraid of each other. Over the years, scientists have found a massive amount of bone fractures, infections, and puncture wounds on many Carcharodontosaurus fossils, especially concentrated in the head region. These wounds most likely all came from other Carcharodontosaurus. This means that bloody battles between these giant predators were likely far more common than we imagined. Some of the puncture wounds and infection marks on the skulls are generally believed to have been left by face-biting fights. Meanwhile, those severe bone fractures might have resulted from head-on collisions between two Carcharodontosaurus. After all, those battering ram-like structures on their nose bridges were very likely genuinely used to ram into one another. However, one thing is certain: when these apex predators went to war with each other, the other animals were probably quite happy, because at least on that day they would not be the ones being targeted. But unfortunately, for most of the time, Carcharodontosaurus still preferred to hunt other animals, rather than engage in brutal fights with its own kind. And its prey list can also be described as a luxury menu. It included a large number of ornithopod dinosaurs, small theropods, and even giant sauropods. That is right, those long-necked behemoths, easily weighing tens of tons, were prey that Carcharodontosaurus likely dared to attack. Some people even believe it might have been one of the few apex predators in North Africa, at the time capable of genuinely threatening giant sauropods. So the name Carcharodontosaurus was truly earned. Moreover, its entire family inherited this terrifying reputation. It belonged to an entirely different theropod family known as Carcharodontosauridae. The name of this family actually originated from Carcharodontosaurus itself. They first appeared in the late Jurassic period and subsequently spread rapidly across the globe. Currently, their fossils have been found in Africa, Europe, North and South America, and possibly even Asia and Australia. This family also gave rise to a group of the most exaggerated and terrifying apex predators in Earth history. Besides Carcharodontosaurus, there were also Giganotosaurus, Maposaurus, Rugops, Tyrannoteuton, and so on. These guys were all heavyweight monsters, and many members successfully secured the position of apex predator in their local ecosystems. Carcharodontosaurus, of course, was no exception. Its fossils have currently been found in multiple locations across all of North Africa, including regions in Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, Niger, and Tunisia. You could even say it was actually quite common in North Africa at the time. The era it lived in was approximately between 94 million and 100 million years ago, which is the early stage of the late Cretaceous period. Of course, if you actually traveled back to that era, you would find that the North Africa of that time was a completely different world from today. Nowadays, most of that area is covered by the Sahara Desert. But in that era, the Sahara did not even exist yet. The entire North Africa was instead a relatively humid tropical environment. Although some regions remained dry, overall it was filled with rivers, swamps, wetlands, and vast forests. At the same time, because the sea level back then was much higher than it is today, the coastline extended deep into the interior of the continent. A large number of inland seas, river channels, and floodplains continuously formed. Over time, this place gradually evolved into a massive biodiversity hotspot. The most common plants in the forests were various gymnosperms and ferns. This environment also supported an astonishing number of dinosaurs. Scientists have already confirmed that an incredibly exaggerated number of large dinosaurs lived in North Africa at the time. This included various giant sauropods, such as Aegyptosaurus, Rabacosaurus, Paralitodon, and more. Besides these, there were also plenty of iguanodonts, hadrosaurs, and perhaps even the very last surviving members of the stegosaur family, still active here. And do not forget, Carcharodontosaurus was not the only large theropod here. Its contemporary neighbors also included Deltadromeus rugops and, of course, Spinosaurus. Even Spinosaurus was larger in size than Carcharodontosaurus. Because of this, many people like to compare the North Africa of that time to the Morrison Formation ecosystem in the western United States, because the number of large predators here was simply too outrageous. Consequently, scientists believe that there was highly likely a distinct niche partitioning among these apex predators. Simply put, although they all ate meat, they did not eat the exact same things. For example, Spinosaurus preferred to stay close to rivers, swamps, and coastal areas, primarily hunting large fish and aquatic prey. Carcharodontosaurus, on the other hand, leaned more toward inland environments, truly targeting those giant terrestrial dinosaurs. However, even so, conflicts were still impossible to completely avoid, especially during the dry season. This is because North Africa, at that time, seemed to frequently experience massive, prolonged droughts. Once water sources and prey diminished, many conflicts that could have otherwise been avoided would eventually erupt anyway. So the question arises, if Carcharodontosaurus and Spinosaurus really fought, who would win? Of course, nobody truly knows the answer, but many researchers believe the outcome would likely depend on the specific two individuals involved. Looking at the on-paper stats, Carcharodontosaurus was actually much better suited for hunting large terrestrial animals, since that was literally its profession. It possessed a far more lethal flesh-tearing bite that could directly cause extremely exaggerated trauma with a single chomp. The mouth of Spinosaurus, on the other hand, was geared more toward gripping and piercing, making it better suited for catching fish. For a massive target on the level of Carcharodontosaurus, the attack style of a Spinosaurus might require many successful strikes to actually inflict a fatal wound. However, there are two key factors that must be considered here. First, Spinosaurus had incredibly exaggerated forelimbs. Its arms were not only enormous but also highly robust, while also sporting giant claws that resembled scythes. Usually, these claws were primarily used to control large fish or rip open prey bodies directly. But once entering a battle, they could equally turn into extremely dangerous melee weapons. If struck directly by them, the consequences would absolutely not be light. The second issue is the size gap. Generally speaking, Spinosaurus did indeed have the potential to grow larger than Carcharodontosaurus. So, if a Carcharodontosaurus weighing around 4 tons faced an 8-ton Class B Spinosaurus, it probably would not be very eager to start a fight and might even be directly overpowered by sheer bulk. Conversely, if it were a large adult Carcharodontosaurus weighing over 6 tons, the situation might be completely different. Because Carcharodontosaurus evolved specifically to hunt giant terrestrial behemoths, combined with its extremely dangerous biting style and the battering ram structure on its nose bridge, it would not necessarily lose in a real fight. Ultimately, though, life and death battles of this magnitude were probably not very common. That is because North Africa, at the time, had another characteristic: there was simply too much prey. A huge number of non-dinosaur animals also lived here, providing these apex predators with an abundant food source. This was especially true in the coastal regions. Due to the extensive water systems, there was life practically everywhere throughout the entire ecosystem. Take pterosaurs, for instance. We currently know of at least 11 different pterosaurs living in the same ecosystem as Carcharodontosaurus. These included the massive Azhdarchids, Tapagerids, and more. Furthermore, their size span was extreme. Some were just small to medium-sized, but others had wingspans exceeding 6 meters, standing taller than the vast majority of human adults. In addition, various crocodiliform animals were also everywhere, and many of them were equally enormous. So, in the North Africa of that time, you had better not carelessly approach the water edge, because monsters far more terrifying than modern crocodiles might have been lurking there. Of course, what truly allowed these giant predators to experience crazy population explosions was actually fish. The freshwater systems of North Africa back then were home to a massive amount of supergiant fish. Some of them were even among the largest freshwater fish in Earth history. Beyond that, snakes, turtles, lizards, crustaceans, and insects also populated the entire ecosystem. And unfortunately, if you have a phobia of insects, you would probably completely break down here. Scientists have discovered severe insect damage marks on a large number of local plant fossils. This means the insect population in North Africa during that era was likely exaggeratedly high. But honestly, compared to bugs, what you should truly be afraid of is probably those giant pterosaurs suddenly swooping out of the forest, or an adult Carcharodontosaurus in a starving state. After all, without a doubt, it was absolutely one of the most ferocious and elite terrestrial predators of its era, and its reign over this land may have lasted up to 5 million years. However, even a monster of this caliber ultimately could not beat the final boss, which was Mother Nature herself. About 94 million years ago, Carcharodontosaurus suddenly disappeared from the fossil record. In other words, it went extinct. Even today, scientists are still not certain what exactly destroyed this apex predator. However, the timeline of its extinction was very close to a global oceanic anoxic event. That was an extremely unique period when oxygen levels in the global oceans began to drop on a massive scale, turning huge swaths of the ocean into oxygen-depleted dead zones. Up until now, scientists still have not fully figured out how this disaster actually occurred. Various theories keep emerging, and some even suspect it might be related to volcanic activity at the time. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the Earth ecosystem during that period suffered an extremely severe shock. Therefore, it is very difficult for scientists to be 100% sure if the extinction of Carcharodontosaurus was directly linked to this global anoxic event. But one thing is very clear: by the time that dinosaur-destroying asteroid struck Earth 66 million years ago, Carcharodontosaurus was already long gone from this world. The silent disappearance of the Carcharodontosaurus, a colossal slaughter machine and an apex predator seemingly without equal, leaves us with a profoundly meaningful lesson. It reminds us that no matter how massive you are, how devastating your bite force is, or how sharp your claws might be, every living creature is ultimately fragile when facing the absolute power of Mother Nature. Dominance through sheer brute strength is always temporary. True survival relies entirely on adaptability and respecting the delicate balance of our ecosystem. Looking back at the tragic fall of these prehistoric kings, I can't help but think about us humans. We build mega cities, master advanced technology, and crown ourselves as the ultimate rulers of the food chain. But if we continue to ignore massive environmental shifts and the health of our oceans, just like that ancient global anoxic event, are we blindly walking down the exact same path to extinction as the Carcharodontosaurus? My friends, all the information, theories about their terrifying combat capabilities, and the exact reasons behind their extinction that I've shared today are the direct result of my own personal research, synthesis, and analytical perspective. And because this is my personal take, it could be entirely right or wrong, real or exaggerated, depending on how you look at the fossil record. So, what do you think about all of this? Do you believe an ecosystem saturated with this many nightmare monsters actually functioned like this? Or are we just amplifying the truth through the lens of time? Between the T-Rex, Spinosaurus, and Carcharodontosaurus, who is the true prehistoric king in your heart? I highly encourage you to leave your honest thoughts and perspectives down below so we can debate and break this down together. And before you go, I have one quick question for you. Where in the world are you watching this video from right now? It always amazes me how this TIAN Science YouTube channel can connect passionate science lovers from every single corner of our beautiful planet. Thank you so much for sticking with me until the very last second. I will see all of you down in the comments section.